Welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity. Both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, something I'm increasingly fascinated by and so often misunderstood. So little by little, I hope to build an archive of fascinating stories, experiences and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by Illustration X. Go and take a look at their incredible global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, go and listen to Dirty Freud over on Spotify and all good music platforms now. Today I'm joined by psychologist Kimberley Wilson, who specialises in whole body mental health. We're going to talk about why we shouldn't separate the mind and the body when it comes to the likes of nutrition, physical activity, to keep ourselves in the best mental and creative state. Hello and welcome to the show. How are you doing? I hope you're well. I hope things are good. I hope you're managing these dark nights well. As we edge into November, it's that time of year. There's a lot of traps for these kind of brains that a lot of us creative industry folk tend to have, which are sensitive, curious, introspective brains, and they can lead us into certain pickles, shall we say. And this seasonal shift I find when things aren't good, when we hear the news, when, the dark nights kick in and there's storm after storm, you could forgive anyone for falling into negative thought spirals. And that's why last year and now this year I am trying to use this podcast to provide some tools to help us out of those ruts. So before I get any deeper, I just want to say a big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. They've been here since day one and continue to provide a solid supporting for this podcast. So you've probably seen the Kickstarter. I haven't shut up about it for the last 2 weeks. At the time of listening, if you're getting this show on Tuesday, it'll be 2 weeks since. And I've passed the 70% mark. It's mind-blowing. Thank you guys. Overwhelming support. Really vital, valuable, heartwarming stuff, because as you'll know, I've been doing this for 7 years. I've been having these conversations formally for 10 since I started the campaign with Calm, exploring the emotional benefits of artistic expression back in 2013. And that decade has been distilled into one body of work, which is the Creative Condition book. It's an evolution of this podcast. It's the beginning of a broader ecosystem, including a YouTube channel, through which I want to elevate the standing of creativity in our society. That's here in the UK, that's all over the place. I want to work hard and partner with the right organisations who can help the people who are going to benefit from creativity the most. And I believe that's every human. So if you want to get behind that, if you want to check out the book, then please do now. It's on the Kickstarter. You only have to go to any of my social media channels to find the channel and support. You can pledge. You can get your copy of the book right now. It's going to be landing on your desk through your letterbox if you've pledged come March next year, optimistically February. A lot to be done. Got to be typeset yet. There's a proofread to happen, but it's essentially written, edited. The cover is designed, and I've got the printer lined up. So it's exciting times. I'm also going to be speaking at Off Festival 2024. A live conversation with Stefan Sagmeister. We're going again. For anyone who heard episode 199, where I interviewed Stefan about his brand new book, Now Is Better. We're going again at Off 2024 on the Friday night, April 5th. Very excited, slightly nervous. Got to get my ducks in a row for that one. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you to everyone, like I said, who's pledged to the Kickstarter. Please do consider doing it to get this thing over the line and get this book funded. And in return, you will get your first edition copy and a credit, which is going to be in there forever, saying thank you, cheers, you are a part of this. You've made it possible. So today I'm talking to Kimberley Wilson. This is the first of 2 episodes I'm doing around nutrition. The second one is with Zuzana Kowalska. a microbiologist, I believe, who is specialising in the gut microbiome using artificial intelligence to track the data of it. It's deep stuff, but it's really valuable stuff. This is not just about eat healthier, feel better. This is about the science. This is about why it's critical to our creativity to feed this organism that is our human body, and the brain in particular, the right stuff to get optimal creativity. So that's a thought process that I started to get into more when I had a personal low last year, which I've mentioned several times now on the podcast. It wasn't quite depression, but I was very down. I was very entering a lot of negative thought spirals about the climate crisis and about other big news headlines. And as a part of my attempt to heal from that, I wanted to study the brain more. I wanted to find out why I was having these primitive responses to things that my brain considered a threat. And once you start to learn about that, it really gives you a framework that helps you to overcome the pitfalls of a sensitive mind, which are we soak up our environment with greater richness than less sensitive people. And the downside to that is it's painful at times. It's really painful. And that's where I was at. But as part of that, I really wanted to learn more about my nutrition. So my first guest today is Kimberley Wilson. And Kimberley is awesome. You must read her book, Unprocessed, Why the Food We Eat is Fueling Our Mental Health Crisis. And it's big, big stuff. So Kimberley was on the Great British Bake Off. She loves to bake cakes, and she was on there early on in one of the earlier seasons. And when I came across this book, much like when I came across Jen Granneman's Sensitive, The Power of a Thoughtful Mind in an Overwhelming World, my head fell off. It was like, whoa, here we go. Here's another essential book for learning about my food, about what I need to be eating, more so than I currently know. And it's helped so much. I've eradicated the kind of essential need for a nap every day. And it's not like I don't indulge in that particular treat, but I don't need to do it anymore. I'm bouncing. It's really, really helped my mental state and my creativity. So that's why I wanted to bring Kimberley to you on this podcast. And also Susanna in a forthcoming episode. We're going to be specifically talking about the gut microbiome, the link between gut health, brain health, and mental energy and creativity. Fascinating stuff to me. I hope it's going to be the same to you. Big thank you again to the supporters of the show, Illustration X. Please do get behind the Kickstarter. I'm not going to shut up about it until it's over the line. You can get your copy of the book. Come on. I'm not asking for handouts here. I'm asking for you to buy the book up front so I can make it. Cheers, guys. Enjoy this conversation with the wonderful Kimberley Wilson. Without getting too deep too early with this, it was both good and bad to hear in your book the sort of crystallization of my suspicions in as far as, the world we live in, the capitalist society and the vested interests and the huge barriers that places on information about good nutrition and about the links to mental health. So I thought a nice starting point, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little whistle stop of what you do, but also about whole body mental health, which I think is a wonderful way to put it.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I am a chartered psychologist, and I trained as a counselling psychologist, which means I trained in a range of modalities. So CBT and what we would consider kind of psychodynamic, or the older Freudian inspired way of thinking and person-centered. And I have a master's degree in nutrition. And so what I do is really think about the interaction of those two things, of psychology and food. And so part of that is about the impact of food and nutrients on brain development, brain structure, its function, mental health. But I also try to help people think about their relationship with food, what food says to them, how they think about it, because it's incredibly complex. And we think of food as this kind of ubiquitous, all around us substance that everybody's an expert in, but it's deeply irrational, our food choices, our relationships with food. And it actually takes a lot of thinking and thinking through for people who have difficulty or complexities around it. And then from that, I really started thinking about the contradiction in the idea that I did, over nearly a decade's worth of training to do the job that I do. And we're supposed to be experts in psychology and the brain and helping people stay well. And actually what we didn't get taught is how to keep the brain healthy. Let's start at the foundations. What is a healthy brain? How do we get one? How do we support it? Because the brain is the foundation of mental life and mental health. And so I really started then to work through the connections, the other, as well as nutrition, the other evidence-based lifestyle factors and habits that have been shown to be supportive for good brain health. And that's what I call whole body mental health. I don't think it makes sense to try to consider mental life as separate from the body. It doesn't, your brain is fed from everything you eat and the things that you breathe in, the kind of metabolites of your gut microbiome. It doesn't make sense for us to think of them as separate and distinct. And so I'm trying to help people to think about themselves as an integrated organism that needs taken care of in all ways.
And it's constant work, isn't it? It's a lifetime of work. It's, I guess, never too late to change, never too early to begin. It's very interesting. And one thing that I always found quite interesting, and maybe my grounding in this, it isn't any kind of loftiness or arrogance, but I think I grew up sports obsessed. And, only at like the age of 16 did I realise that Leeds United wasn't going to happen for me. My below average football ability. So I kind of switched to drawing footballers, which led to a career as an illustrator. I worked for a lot of sports clients, but love of sport, what that love of sport did was my curiosity and interest there. It brought me this awareness of physical activity's positive impact on mental health, on the spirit, and the energy of our body. And all that stuff. So I did have a little bit of an awareness of it, and therefore found it very surprising when people would either find themselves out of shape, feeling lethargic or run down. And it would seem to me that food would be the last port of call. There was almost this denial and unwillingness to consider that it could be that. It had to be anything but that. Is that something you encounter often? And I guess you hit up on it there, but why do you think it is so uncomfortable to have these conversations about diet? Because it really is.
Yeah, so I think yes and no in terms of the hesitancy, reluctance to engage with these conversations. So certainly when I first started thinking and talking about this stuff, maybe it feels like close to a decade ago, maybe. Certainly 7 or so years ago. And I would be talking to colleagues. I used to be a governor of a mental health trust, and I'd be talking to colleagues about this, very interesting, impressive research that's showing these associations between diet quality and future risk of depression. And they do control for these other factors, and it does seem to hold out. And I would get, even from colleagues, kind of scofful remarks. And it seemed to be partly about both the novelty and the ubiquity of food. So the novelty of the idea, and it was really a sense of, well, I've never heard of that, so it can't be true. And again, that comes back to the idea that we are mental health professionals and we've been trained, we are the experts in the brain, and we know everything about what causes depression. And we know it's your childhood or your difficulties, your stresses in your everyday life. And that hadn't been part of the training, so it wasn't part of the kind of consciousness. And then the other thing is not just the ubiquity of food, but the mundanity of food. We get up and we make all of these unconscious food choices, and we've been eating food since the beginning of time, and it's not a novel drug, it's not a new molecule, it's not a mushroom found in the Himalaya. Like it's just the everyday food that we're eating. And I think there's humans, we love a bit of novelty, and we love it to sound impressive and fresh and scientific. And basically, it comes back to the same stuff people have been saying over and over again, which is vegetables and beans and whole grains, and making sure that you're getting the fundamental micronutrients that your brain needs. And I think to some extent, it's just not interesting enough. It's not sexy enough for people to really have gotten bored with. Certainly back then, I think things are changing, and I think the research into the microbiome is one of the things that really helped create that shift. And I think the thing about the microbiome is that it did feel novel, it did feel new, and suddenly these bugs had something to do with it. But fundamentally, we're still talking about food, and we're still talking about the body and its impact on the brain.
And I guess we're almost, to a degree, we're victims of being quite spoiled, in a country that has an abundance of food choice, and incomes and poverty notwithstanding,
yes,
we have relatively easy access to food. So therefore, it almost becomes this thing that you have to do to get on with the rest of your day. Yeah. When you look at the seismic role it plays in your day-to-day efficiency and your mood and everything else. It's so much more, isn't it?
Yes, and I think what's happened over time is that we have lost the reverence for food. I think when you're, and I don't mean that we should all be kind of bowing down to cabbages and stuff, but I think there was a sense in which food was the organizing principle of the day, wasn't it? When we're thinking about either agrarian cultures, even hunter-gatherers, the food was the organizing principle. We had to go out and find food, and then we had to come back together and prepare it, because it took a group of people to be able to acquire adequate nutrition. And then we shared it. And it was around food that we formed the basis of culture and society, and we think to some extent sharing and knowledge and culture, because there were things about the acquisition of food, knowing how to hunt, knowing how to track, that we had to learn, remember, and teach to other members of the group. And I think over the years, and of course some of this we should be grateful for, we don't have to work quite as hard for food, but it's meant that food has become a commodity. It's just a thing, and it's lost its value. And we very, very much think about food now in terms of its impact on aesthetics, I think. Will it make me fat? Will it make me thin? Maybe if you're a bit more enlightened, will it help me live longer? Will it improve my longevity? But we're not thinking about the fundamental thing, which is you are made of food. Every cell in your body is composed of the fragments of food that your mother ate when she was pregnant with you and that you've eaten ever since. And so you're fundamentally composed of the food that you eat, and therefore we should care about it. We really should.
And it really, what I found recently, I was already on a kind of an upward spike, my wife and I, in terms of improving our own diets, particularly since becoming parents. We were never terrible, but it's just, the things you learn, you gradually start to implement more and more. But I'm finding it incredibly rewarding now. Like before we spoke, the lunch, I took an hour to go and make my lunch, whereas before reading your book, I would have been a whirlwind trying to get a Hoover in and trying, and walking the dog, and then it's like getting to throw a piece of toast down my throat. And it's kind of like, no, actually, there's nuts and there's leafy greens and there's homemade hummus, and actually by shifting that habit, that's become part of what we do now, and it's actually a fun, as you mentioned there with the hunter-gatherer thing, a social activity, and it's something we involve the kids in. We let them come and just have a stir of whatever, and let them be a part of that, so that they enjoy that process, and therefore are more likely to engage with this maybe complex food for their age. So there is something to be said about that, and also about the community aspect of it all.
Yeah, and I think also the only people who win or kind of profit from the commodification of food is industry, right? The only people who profit from the idea that cooking is a waste of time, and that really is the messaging, literally, don't cook, just eat is the message. Cooking is a waste of time. It's an inconvenience. You could be doing something else. Maybe what you could be doing is working more. You could be more productive if you didn't have to cook. And in fact, you could be more productive if you didn't have to chew. Let's make meal replacement drinks so that you don't even have to take the time to chew the food you're consuming. You can sit at your desk and taking enough calories to not have to, putting any of that additional effort. And I think, partly that's a response to the kind of labor conditions. People are feeling more and more time pressed, but I think partly it is straightforward marketing, which is if we can position cooking as a time suck, as a hindrance, as something that gets in the way of your life, and then we can provide you with alternatives and solutions to the problems of cooking and meal times. And I think that's really been the direction of a lot of food marketing over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads us nicely into the sort of scenario that I wanted to present. And there are sort of two. So I've been a freelance illustrator for 15 years. And, in amongst that, there's writing, there's podcasting, a mixed bag of things. So as freelancers, from that standpoint, my audience is predominantly kind of artists, designers, illustrators. And what we have is this double-edged sword of we're very passionate about what we do. The vast majority of us did it for pleasure long before we even considered or found out about this industry that we have to make a living from it. But the downside of that, it's obviously a beautiful thing, but the downside of that is we get this kind of guilt that, oh my God, I've got this opportunity to do something I enjoy for a living. So I've got to give 24/7 to it. I've always got to be seen to be productive. And the downside of that is, from an agency perspective, we all dash across the road and get pizzas. We run to Pret and get a sandwich and wolf it, and we come back. And what I've been learning throughout this process of exploring creativity is about the need to not only leave space to digest the things we're putting into our senses, because without allowing the unconscious to do its work, I don't believe we can be truly creative. We can't arrive at those eureka moments. So there's that aspect. There's the absolute overload. But then it's this vicious cycle, because we're also very sensitive people. So I had talked to Jen Graneman, who's the co-author of a book called Sensitive. The Power of a Thoughtful Mind in an Overwhelming World. Absolutely incredible book, goes deep into the science. And, the whole thing about creativity is that we're divergent thinkers and we join the dots. So, of course, I find myself with my brain pulling all these things together, and underpinning all of it is nutrition, good rest, and sympathy for that information overload, which is a real issue. The fact that the predominant number of people in the creative industry are highly sensitive people, which I believe accounts for 30% of humans, who soak in the world around them with a greater degree of color and everything else. And they're affected by all of the downsides of all of that. I mean, maybe we could talk about the creativity in the brain and the kind of hippocampus and actually how that works. Would I be right in saying that memory and creativity are kind of linked within that region of the brain? I'm very lame.
No, you are right, and it seems to be particularly in the area of divergent thinking. So, thinking outside of the box, and that in order to do that, you need a couple of conditions. You broadly, being relaxed is helpful. Of course, well rested and relaxed is helpful. But also you need to be able to combine unconsciously, usually, things that and are well acquainted with new information. And it's that synthesis of those two things that brings you to a new solution to a problem, or a creative solution to a problem. And so you need to engage with your memory. And the hippocampus is a part of the brain that is, we consider it the seat of memory. It's about consolidation and organization of memory in the brain, as well as small amounts of recall itself. What's interesting about this relationship between nutrition and the hippocampus is that it seems to be pretty well established. We know that people who have a poorer overall dietary quality have a smaller hippocampi. So this part of the brain that is so important for learning, memory, and creativity seems to be impaired. We've seen intervention studies that have taken people who generally eat a healthy diet and have put them on a kind of Western style ultra processed diet for just a week. And they have seen impairments in learning and memory that is dependent on the hippocampus within that week. And it seems to be underpinned by a major impairment in the function of the hippocampus. So that this dietary pattern, which is increasingly common, seems to be associated with brain changes that impair our capacity for learning, memory, and this creative function. So it really would be a vicious cycle, because, let's take a group of people who already have a kind of innate sense of creativity or capacity to engage with their creativity, but their brain isn't getting what it needs in order to engage with that. And if you end up feeling as if you're not generating, then that can affect self-esteem, that can affect the way that you think of your capacities, that might affect the quality of your work. And then, round and round and round we go.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think the thing is, again, it goes back to the work culture that you mentioned, the productivity and the need to, what we're finding, like any other industry, I suppose, at the moment, is that people are managing what should be 2 or 3 specialists' jobs in one role. Yes. So not only are they given this kind of unreasonable workload, but it's a neglect, and dare I say it, a foolish oversight by the people who run any company or any client who is putting these kind of demands. Surely it's the classic thing where actually with 6 effective hours and a good lunch and a good break, you're going to get more out of those people in terms of creativity and genuinely good, valuable, and to put it in their language, fiscally rewarding ideas than someone who's working 10 hours but is doing what I said, running across the Pret, or is stressed and burned out and oversensitive and doubting their abilities. It's kind of crazy. We almost need, I mean, I suppose it's exactly what you're doing, Kimberley, isn't it? It's working to try and challenge that culture and to look at the morality and the human side of this.
Yeah, I think, and it's very, very difficult. It's very, the idea that we can perhaps go back to a kind of, ancient Greece where people had patronages and we just funded artists to have a very quiet, lovely life would be lovely. It seems unlikely, but we certainly need to, I think, move away from the idea that not just creative industries, but any human is just a unit of production, that you can put someone in a room and squeeze productivity and outcomes out of them without giving them the opportunity to recover, to refuel, to restock, to rest, and imagine that that's going to be a sustainable way to live. Like it's just an unreasonable expectation. And what's interesting is I think we've been sold it so much that a lot of people don't realize it's an unreasonable expectation. And I will often see people, they will come to me and they will say, I should be able to do this. I don't know why I'm so tired, or, somebody else sitting next to me is managing to do this and this and this. And I very often have said, listen, it's not you, it's London. Right? It's the expectations of just industry in general, but I think big competitive urban cities like London, which are also very transient, they're very competitive. People come in essentially to London, they try and make a name for themselves, they try to make some money, and then they leave, so that you don't have the community, you don't have the opportunity to get to know people. You're constantly, I think, hyper vigilant and slightly anxious, and so there are lots of ways in which the expectations of the world make it very difficult for us to understand that these are just unreasonable demands that have been made on us. And that part of the thing we have to do is to say, what is the limit? What is the boundary? And what am I capable of? And what do I have to let go? That's the really, really difficult thing.
Yeah. Well, yes. Very, very much so. It's been I think that, there are improvements. I know a lot of agencies now who are great actually with their staff, a lot more flexible working, a lot more 4-day weeks, a lot more, sympathy to human needs. And it pays off dividends. You find time and time again that those agencies come out on top in terms of staff satisfaction, relationships with clients and everything else. It's not too complex, but it just takes change. I read a book by Sir Ken Robinson, and he was talking about the brain and the kind of regions within, and it really made me laugh when he said that, he said, okay, look, the area that is responsible for speech is also linked to creativity and math, mathematics skills. He said, however, if you take out that region of the brain that's responsible for musical ability, it's not going to hum a tune, and his point was that the brain functions as one. So this brings us back to this kind of the idea of brain health. So again, I find that very interesting about the hippocampus. But essentially, and again, to separate the brain from the body is also futile, isn't it? And this is the point of your work. So about the impact on cognition and mood, because these are two fundamental pillars of creativity. You could be the most artistically gifted person on the planet, but if you're in a foul mood all the time or you're run down, you're not going to be able to fire, are you? And you're going to be cutting corners and operating on minimums. And you mentioned the microbiome earlier. I wonder if we could just get into that a little bit and its impact on mood.
Okay, so there's lots of different places. Let me see if I can say concise. So I think, with the caveat that we know optimistically about 1% of what there is to learn about the microbiome and its impact on the organism as a whole and maybe the brain in particular for our purposes. Some of what we do know already is very, very interesting. So there does seem to be an association that's been demonstrated pretty robustly in animal studies, where they will use a breed of mouse or rat that has a sterile gut, and then compare various interventions with a wild type mouse that has a microbiome. And there seems to be these associations between gut microbiota composition, the diversity or the types and strains of microbes that are in the gut, and not just a function of the brain, so tendency to anxiety and depression, but also some structural shifts in the brain as well, that what the early microbiome, either in utero or very, very soon after birth, seems to be able to affect the way that the brain cells connect with one another. How that happens is there are a few different hypotheses. So one is about the metabolites, so things that your gut microbiome produces when you eat foods. And some of those things are precursors to neurotransmitters, so things like GABA. And GABA is, you can think of it as the almost a relaxant of the brain. GABA is kind of, we're just gonna chill, relax, it's cool. So your gut microbiome can produce precursors to GABA that can cross into the bloodstream and perhaps make it into circulation and then cross the blood-brain barrier. There are other neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, that are produced by the gut microbiome, but it's worth saying very explicitly that the serotonin that's produced in the gut, we don't think it can't cross into the brain. It stays pretty much more local and is about kind of gut motility. There might be a question about whether it is affecting the nerves in your gut and whether that can signal to the brain, but that still needs to be seen. But certainly short chain fatty acids, precursors to neurotransmitters, vitamins, these things are being produced, and many of them can cross into the bloodstream and into the brain. The other effect that the microbiome can have is on the stress system. So it seems that the microbiome can affect that HPA axis and how you respond to stress. And the important thing about that is that when you're stressed, your cognition changes, because stress is an indicator of threat or a challenge that you have to face. What happens when you're stressed is that your focus narrows. You're not looking at things expansively. You're focusing on just one tiny little thing, and you're probably focusing on the threat in order to protect yourself. But what that stops you from being able to do is to allow your mind to wander and to be a bit more open and contemplative. So there's. And of course, the microbiome, the fastest way to shift the composition and diversity of your microbiome is through your food. Exercise does it as well. Stress does it as well. There's a bidirectional relationship between stress and the microbiome. Obviously, getting ill, if you get a gut bug, that will do it as well. But in terms of the kind of deliberate and swift changes you can make, again, it's the food that you eat is doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, well, what's interesting here, and this is something I've found, you mentioned about the sheer speed that the shift from a kind of more Mediterranean diet to a Western diet we can see adverse changes. I would guess that is reflected in quite quickly tangible positive results if we change for the better. Is that correct?
Yes. So what's been demonstrated in particular is, and there was a study I think done towards the end of last year where they compared the impact of a high fiber diet on gut microbiome composition or a high fermented food diet. And what they found was that in terms of increasing diversity, the fermented foods within a couple of weeks, and other studies have shown that dietary changes can work within 48 hours or something like that. Within a very short time frame, you can meaningfully shift the composition of the microbiome. And I suppose the broader point to that is that in evolutionary terms, we have very rapidly shifted the kinds and diversity of the foods that we eat. There are hundreds of thousands of edible plants on the planet, but something like 12 foods, as a combination of plants and animals, make up 75% of the world's diet. So we've really narrowed the diversity of the foods that we would be eating, and certainly the belief is that we've had some species extinction in terms of our gut microbiome because we just don't feed it the foods that it evolved fermenting and consuming.
Wow, that's
yeah. It's wild.
My world, yeah. Confidence is something I wanted to touch on because I think it's something that's dramatically misunderstood. We have this. I think it might have been your own appearance on the Blind Boy podcast, but that's initially where I came across you actually, and I love that show. And you mentioned, the example he gave there was a friend who wanted to be a photographer, and he saw these other music photographers and bought into this idea that there was a certain type of person who was confident enough to do that job, and so on. That's something that's very common in our industry. There's a lot of imposter syndrome, particularly since the advent of social media. We see these shiny, well-presented examples of, and again, that speaks to broader life, doesn't it? And with mental illness on the rise at the moment, also, I think this leads into. Would you mind just giving us your definition of confidence? Because I found it incredible.
Thank you. I love talking about confidence because you're absolutely right. We have this real misnomer and wrong, false beliefs about confidence, that it is a God-given quality. If you're born with it, well done, congratulations, you've won the confidence lottery. And if you haven't, like, sad times for you. We're just going to have to cross our fingers and hope that you can limp your way through life. And that's not the case at all. For me, and the way that I define it, confidence is your brain's ability to predict a positive outcome. And it's really about prediction. Your brain evolved as a prediction machine. You do not engage with life on a moment-to-moment response basis. It would take too long. It would take too much energy. There's too much information coming into you at all times for you to be responding to it bit by bit. So what your brain does is to condense it. After a little while of living, your brain starts to work out, well, this is useful information. This is relevant. And this stuff is just irrelevant. The birds cheeping, irrelevant. The sound of people chattering behind me, irrelevant. So it kind of just ignores it. And so you're largely living in prediction because your brain is saying, well, we've been here before. This is what's likely to happen. This saves me energy. And the only thing that I have to do is course correct if my prediction is incorrect, if the prediction is wrong. So your brain evolved to predict, and everything comes out of that. And so what happens with confidence, when you think of it as a response to prediction, is actually what you need to do is build up enough examples, statistical points, pieces of data for your brain to be able to know that the next time you try something, you're likely to have a positive outcome. And so the example that I use, not in the book, I think a post that I did is, let's say you live in a little town and you've got a little corner shop by the corner of you, and it's very, very, very well stocked. The last 99 times that you went to that corner shop, they had exactly the kind of milk that you like. And then I pop over and you offer me a cup of tea, but you're out of milk. And I ask you, okay, I'll pop down to the shop. How likely is it? How confident are you that when I go to the shop, there will be milk there? And you're likely to say, oh, no, they'll definitely have milk, because based on the 99 previous examples, you're making a prediction that they will have milk. In reality, you have no real sense. The shop could be closed. They could be on holiday. There could have been some weird TikTok trend, which means that all the milk is gone. In reality, you don't know that there is definitely milk, but you are confident in your prediction that they will have stock based on your previous experience. And so when it comes to something like producing a good piece of work, having a good outcome, public speaking, really it's about building up practice. Confidence is practice. Tiny incremental improvements, tiny incremental opportunities that build up to tell your brain, we've done this enough times to predict that the next time we'll be able to do it. That is confidence. Confidence is just practice.
And the reason I brought that up is because it goes back to the gut microbiome thing, because it's this incredible loop, this ecosystem, where if that's not right, again, sorry about my layman terms, if that's not right and you're irritable or lethargic or tired or whatever the adverse impacts of subpar nutrition might be, then even with all that, if your body is telling you something different, then confidence can plummet. And I guess does that lead into valence and effective states? Because that was another thing that blew my mind.
Yeah. So yes, because the other thing that we have to know about cognition and decision making and emotion, and again, this emotion, if we come emotion and mood and creativity, there is a loop there, is that, again, it's not just neck up. Your cognition and your moods, your emotions are a synthesis between what is happening in your body, often unconscious signals from your body, sometimes conscious ones, but often unconscious, and how your brain interprets them. And so, for example, a conscious signal might be something like having a stone in your shoe. And the sun might be shining, you might be having a lovely time, but if you have a stone in your shoe and there's a kind of piece of physical discomfort, it's quite hard to be in a good mood. You'll be irritated, you'll be a bit agitated and a bit listless until you get the stone out of your shoe. So that's an example of how the situation, the environment, the conditions of your life could be absolutely fine. This physical discomfort is creating what we call negative valence, a sense of unpleasantness in your body that your brain has to make sense of. And your brain makes sense of it by creating an instance of negative mood, of being irritated. And then you get rid of it and you're feeling fine. But that often happens also, of course, all the time unconsciously. So if you're hungry, particularly if you're coming down with something, some of the earliest indicators of coming down with a virus is a shift in mood, more depressive states, maybe a bit more anxiety for some people. And again, that's because your body is sending your brain signals, something is wrong. And until you are physically ill, consciously kind of ill, it's not running down your nose or anything like that, then your brain is just saying, something is wrong. I'm not sure what it is. Or maybe we're worried about that work that we have to do next week. Or maybe there's something wrong in our relationship that we're just trying to avoid. Or maybe we're no good. Your brain will try to find something to hang that discomfort on. And again, this is another reason why it's so important to try to do what you can to ensure that your body is in a good physiological state. And that, of course, includes nutrition, but exercise is really important in terms of creating positive valence. Sleep is absolutely essential in terms of both the sense of valence, but also making sure that your executive functions, your memory, your impulse control, your goal-directed behaviors are online. If you can do what you can to make sure your body is in a good physical state, then you can try to increase the likelihood that the signals that your body is sending to your brain are good ones. We're doing good here. Things are great. Well done. Keep going, which then contribute to a good sense of mood, perhaps relaxation. And those then create the qualities either for well-being or, in this conversation, creativity.
You again, the sleep thing. And I, as a parent of young twins, things are a little better now, and the difference is profound. I've been very fortunate in that I've never really suffered much with mental health issues. I've got such an empathy for that, and I've done a lot of work with charities like Calm and self-initiated campaigns, because I just feel very blessed that I've got the belonging and the empowerment that I have through being a part of this wonderful creative industry and having an outlet for any negative thoughts. The only time I've come close, and it was in the last year or so, and it was predominantly to do with the climate crisis. Very sensitive person, very aware of that, and as a new parent, it began to get me down. And sleep was a major factor, because I was so not even so much sleep deprived, but more the broken nights and the kind of the disruption to that pattern. So I was operating on much more of a minimum in terms of my ability to compartmentalize or to look at things in a way, where can I do anything about it?
Yeah.
Or working out the ways that I can address a problem, work through the insurmountable. All this stuff I know, and on a good day, very happy, I'm fine with it. I can manage it. but it's the closest I came to feeling depressed in recent times. And sleep was right there at the core of it. Luckily, we managed to keep our diets on track. We were very aware of the need to be hydrated and everything else. And this is advice I now give to new parents. But sleep, my word, it's hard to overstate, isn't it?
You can't overstate it. Sleep is the cornerstone of psychological well-being for so many reasons. We know, so many things go wrong when you're underslept. So there's a bi-directional relationship between impaired sleep and your risk of mental health conditions, such that things like depression and psychosis and so forth can impair your sleep, but poor sleep can also increase your risk of developing those conditions. We know that poor sleep affects your mood regulation, and that's both the tendency to feel very, very low, but also sometimes if you're chronically poor slept, I don't know if you've ever had it, a slightly manic state where you're a bit hyperactive and you can't focus and you're a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
So we call that mood lability, where your mood rapidly cycles between highs and lows. You make more rigid and riskier decisions when you're underslept. So there's a sense in which you revert to type, and you can just imagine that your poor brain is just working so hard to keep you going that it doesn't have the extra kind of energy or capacity to be flexible in its thinking or more creative in its thinking. And so you'll lose creativity when you're underslept. But also, you lose insight, so you don't realize how impaired your thinking is. And that's why something like drowsy driving is such a risk. You don't realize that you're impaired as much as you would be if you were drunk, because you've lost that insight to where you are. And then in the chronic phase, poor sleep can really start to almost corrode. The study that I read says that chronic poor sleep can lead the brain to kind of cannibalize itself. It starts to really break down the synapses. So and this is, again, when people come to see me and they might be complaining about, and I mean complaining in the kind of psychological sense, not just whining, their concern is maybe around depression, or maybe not even that, just kind of listlessness in life. Where we start is sleep, because nothing else is going to hit or hold if you're underslept. I could be the world's best therapist. But it wouldn't matter what intervention you were getting if your brain is not in the condition to be able to make use of it. And so it's about setting up those conditions, making sure, effectively, if you think of therapy or any kind of intervention as the seeds, making sure you've got fertile neurological soil for those seeds to be sown into. And so sleep is where we start every time.
Yeah, it's huge. And another little thing on the mood thing I wanted to touch upon, the kind of the hangry. So, it's thrown around very flippantly, but it's really not, as I came to learn in your book. And really what I found really sad was the statistics about, or the anecdotal accounts of teachers who were having to kind of compensate for their children's lack of a good breakfast just to get them learning. And that brought my heart to hear that. I thought, oh my word, that's terrible. And
it's so much lost potential. So much lost potential.
And I see it a lot. I see it in my own circles. I see it in broader circles in terms of, the behavior of children and things that, going back to what you said earlier about the quick positive or adverse impacts of a shift in diet can have. It's criminal, isn't it? That there isn't more attention, public information, and provision for those young people. Because, and I think you referenced this, there's that kind of, I'm going to say it, pig-headed attitude that, oh, but if the parents, can't provide you that, we'll not get into that, but it's incredibly frustrating. But that shouldn't fall on the children, should it? We all, as a population, have a responsibility to raise the next generation who are going to be our next doctors, our next whatever that we see valuable in society. I don't know what my question is, but I mean, so the one that jumped out to me was that 90% of young offenders had below average language ability.
Yeah.
I've had people on the show that have worked in young secure children's institutes, and I specifically wanted to find out about the work they did. And what you tend to find is that the work there is actually phenomenal. So they start to get cooking lessons going on, gardening, social activities to do around the arts and what have you. And their results of reformation are actually quite incredible. Therefore, why is this not happening sooner, and what can we do about that?
So, there are lots of reasons I think that we're not doing this sooner. I think, first of all, well, my broad underlying belief is that prison functions as society's unconscious, in as far as it's where we put the things we don't want to think about. It's where we can project the darkest aspects of our own psyche. We can quietly say to ourselves, I would never do that. I'm a good person. I've made the right decisions. And that group of deplorables over there, they're the ones that are the problem. So I think on a psychological level, prisoners, offenders provide a psychological function for the kind of social unconscious. And that gets in the way of sympathy, empathy, and compassion. When you're saying, oh, I'm nothing like that person over there, when part of your view of yourself is about being very different from this group of people, then you fundamentally can't have empathy, because what your organizing principle is to be different from them. And empathy means putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So I think from that, what we get is this kind of attitude, which is they deserve it, or their parents should have tried harder, or they, pick yourself up from your bootstraps, or I had it hard as well, and I'm not like that. A kind of washing the hands of an entire group of people. I think it provides an underclass that people can look down upon. And I think also what it allows people to conveniently forget, because when we think about offenders, we think about grown-ups, dangerous men and women. And what we conveniently forget is that they were children once. They were little babies, innocent, vulnerable, and for the most part, largely unprotected. That I consider prison, when I was working in prisons, you could see from people's histories, they had no chance of being anywhere else. There was not a chance. When your parent introduced you to the crack pipe, you had no chance of being anywhere else. And so what it means, what thinking of prisoners as dangerous adults allows society to do, is to not think about the number of children in the UK who are suffering, who are vulnerable, who are being harmed, who are being at risk, because I think we find that so unbearable that we would rather not think about it.
And the people who you refer to, the young people who've suffered gross unkindness, abuse, poverty, all that said, what I've found, and through the people who, whether it's the people I've interviewed, the people I've read about who directly work with those people, is that it really doesn't take a lot to start to turn things around, because they've had so little. So we're not talking about, massive budgets and huge overhauls and changes that we all need to down tools to do everything. I recently interviewed a guy called Mac Ferrari, who founded Bike Storms. I'm not sure if you're aware of Bike Storms, but Mac lost something like 20 of his friends to murder growing up through gang violence in London. turned his life around. He always had an older head on his shoulders. And what he wanted to do was save the young people who were likely to follow the same path, with something better, something different. So at the time, he was riding motorbikes on a dirt track with friends, and had this community. He decided that through mountain bikes, because all these kids were hanging around watching on the outside with their mountain bikes, and he saw them doing these incredible tricks and flips and whatever else, that he could make that his youth club and take that to the streets. And Mac, along with Jake 100, who was also a founder and is now taking over Bike Storms, have transformed this into a cultural movement where there are Tony Hawk-like characters in there who get this worldwide recognition. And the community and the feel-good factor and the upward surge that has happened just through Mac's hard work and dedication is utterly inspiring. And for that reason, and for the work of the friend I mentioned in the young people's offence institutions, it doesn't take a lot. A little kindness, a little love, a little bit of work to get them back on board in terms of trusting adults, because why would they? When you mentioned there, like a crack pipe, where's the trust going to be? It's not going to be there. And then, of course, nutrition, a little bit of good food to start to work with those moods and everything that we've talked about today. I think that it's innately possible. I think it's really possible. It's
very possible. And that's the enormously frustrating thing about it, is that even if you couldn't, and you're absolutely right, that one of the big challenges in prison, in trying to be a therapist in prison, is that you're asking someone to trust you who has never had a reliable relationship before in their lives, a reliable, safe relationship. So that's an enormous challenge. And that's probably the biggest challenge, because after that, once you've demonstrated your reliability and your care, then often someone is, very, very motivated to demonstrate to themselves that they are worthy of that care. And they, all they've wanted is an opportunity to often demonstrate what they think or have felt or suspected they are capable of. And in terms of the nutrition, it doesn't even need it would be ideal if we could overhaul prison nutrition, but there are vested interests there. But we know from the prison studies that huge changes can be made through supplementation, because this is a population where there is very, very poor nutrition, and basically they fall under the RDA of every single nutrient except omega-6 fatty acids. And so supplementation makes a big difference when you have evidence of deficiency. So we have evidence of deficiency, and we know that supplementation, broad spectrum, vitamins and minerals, improves mental health in prisons. And it's very cheap. It's a very, very cheap intervention that could have positive outcomes on offender mental health, but also then on rates of self-harm, rates of assaults on staff retention, staff morale, all of that sort of stuff. But again, coming back to my original hypothesis, is I think, and certainly around election cycles, what people don't want to be seen to be doing is being soft on criminals. It's important to be seen to be tough on crime, and improving the nutritional status of prisoners perhaps wouldn't appeal to our desire for vengeance and all of that. And so we just don't do it.
Well, it's easier to invent a word like woke, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And rather than anyone who's doing any good with it, rather
than just look at the evidence and see that the path we have been on, this tough on crime path, even in the government's own impact assessments, doesn't work. It makes things worse. Sentences have been getting longer and longer. We still have world-beating recidivism rates. What we've been doing doesn't work. We know that. And so to keep doing the same thing that we know doesn't work and expecting a different outcome is wild.
And it kills me, because there's just such that I'm a big believer in that kind of mischievous might be the wrong word, mischievous, prickly energy that you tend to find in people who've had that kind of struggle in their lives. If you can find a conduit for that, it's nuclear. It's unbelievable. I mean, I had a Gary Mansfield who spent a long time in prison on the show, and he turned his life around through art. So he only started doing art in prison because he couldn't get a place on the IT course. But he's got the most incredible sense of humor. He does fantastic projects now around identity. And what he used to do was write to the young British artists in the mid-90s from prison, and they would send him their monograph. And he got incredibly inspired by all this, and it was his catalyst to turn things around, to get out of prison. and to build something better for himself. But Gary's energy and he's magnetic and it's great. And I just think if you could do that with all those people and put that money into education, but then what do I know? I'm spouting woke nonsense. So
just you. No, you're absolutely right. Not just the energy, but also an incredible capacity, in my experience, to read people, because they've often had to kind of hustle and or to keep themselves safe. The people that I worked with just had this incredible, incisive insight. They could have all been therapists themselves, frankly. But yeah, as I said, it's a huge loss of potential.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, Kimberley, so we've covered so many great things. But I do just want to ask you, what's the big vision? Because your book is incredible, and I hope it goes on to become bigger than you might imagine it. I don't know. But what is the dream? What's the vision? What would you like to see happen in terms of all the great work you've been doing?
If I could narrow it down into two manifesto points, I would want free universal free school meals to all children. I think it's just a compassionate thing to do. If we think desks and chairs and exercise books are essential for learning, so is a brain that is online, well nourished, and able to focus. So I think free school meals is the easiest way to improve attendance, attention, school grades, reduce fights in play, reduce the sense of difference and stigma. Universal free school meals would be a great thing for the entire nation, not just the poorer children, the entire country. I would love to see better nutrition in prisons, and even at the very least, an implementation of the outcome of the prison studies that I talk about in the book. And maybe I have to limit my ambitions to that. I think if we manage to do either of those, I would consider my work done. I would quietly retire and just make jam quietly in my kitchen and stop harassing people, stop being an irritant.
But what I've come to realize is that we talked about cycles quite a lot in this show, but I think that it gives me great heart to come across the work by people like yourself and like Jen Granneman, who I mentioned, about sensitivity, because block by block, I start to see that I'm not alone in my own pursuit of seeing creativity elevated in our society. And I don't speak of Bohemian artists or the Greek Renaissance or anything like that. What I'm talking about is the ability for young people to learn how to express themselves and come together over something they're passionate about at an early age, and to see the world and critical thinking and all the things. But when you put that next to your work and next to Jen Granneman's work, and you start to realize that there are a lot of people doing great work around really important things in society. So, like you said, I had to learn to narrow my own focus to avoid some kind of mental catastrophe, quite honestly, because every day I wanted to do something about whatever it was that was landing in my inbox from whichever petition site I was getting that was breaking my heart. Yeah. I had to kind of just close off a little bit, and I realized that creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, and therefore, I thought, okay, well, what a great cause. Let's find a singular focus. But what's beautiful there is you and I, we have this kind of singular or double-barreled focus, but it just links up with so many other great bits of work that should make us feel less alone. And I would implore anyone who's listening from that, the creative industry, to recognize that actually that's one of the upsides. We mentioned the downside, social media, in some regards at least. There's huge upsides to the connectivity we have through technology, and we can find each other's work and do that great work that we're spending the time doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's lovely. And I think the word that came to mind while you were talking about is that we're both and many others in this area are committed to human flourishing. Yes. The opportunity for people to live up to their best potential. To tackle the big problems of the world, you need good brains that are able to focus, pay attention, think creatively, and it starts in utero, but it starts as early as possible with good nutrition and compassion and care.
Very much so. And just the last thing I wanted to mention, because I was aware as I read your book, it was very incredible as it is. It at times felt a little complex, and
Okay.
overwhelming.
Mhm.
And that's not a criticism or a negative thing. But for anyone who's feeling that with some of the things we've talked about today,
Mm,
gut microbiome and everything else,
mm.
your last chapter was wonderful in terms of what should I eat, and you gave a great kind of in a nutshell, here's what your body needs and your brain to function healthily. But really, it's just it's a fun, invigorating, informative read, and I just thought that was a great way to round it up. And so anyone who's listening might feel a
Thank
little
you.
flustered by all the things we've talked about. I would highly recommend reading it, and it's really not overwhelming. It's just it's quite life changing actually for me.
Wow.
Mm.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
I mean that. That's not just platitudes because we're on a podcast. I don't really lie to anyone on this show. It's no one's policing it. It's just me. But but I've had about 2 naps in the last 2 weeks, and it used to be a daily necessity because I would be nodding off my desk at 2 p.m. And I know that's common, but once again, I didn't join the dots. I didn't start to look at what I was having for lunch, what I shouldn't be having at lunch. And since I've changed that, even with a few bad nights, and my energy is so much better. So thank you.
Awesome. You're very, very, very welcome. Yes. And if anybody does find anything confusing or overwhelming, just head over to my Instagram, drop me a DM. I will answer questions. I love answering questions, and we can hopefully clarify and simplify and make something practical and implementable for you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, Kimberley. And
My absolute pleasure.
A joy to chat, and keep on the great work.
Thank you so much. And you take good care.
Thank you so much to Kimberley Wilson for taking the time to have this conversation today about food, about whole body mental health. I hope you found that as interesting as I did, because I thought that was bloody fascinating. Not gonna lie, really, real favourite of mine so far, and I really have doubled down on my diet, and I recommend you do the same because it's really helped with my drive, my creativity, my daily happiness as well. I'm not gonna lie, it's really equipped me to manage the challenges in my life so much better. And I don't know why this comes as a revelation at 40 years old. Not even a revelation. I was always aware of it, but as something that I needed to action here now at 40. Anyway, it's helped so much. So do it, guys. Get Kimberley's book, Unprocessed: How the Food We Eat is Fueling a Mental Health Crisis, is essential. I did it as an audio book because I was under siege with my young twins and busy with work, and I was able to consume it in the studio, and I just sat there taking so many notes, and in the end I thought, you know what, screw it, I need to email Kimberley and try my luck. And she said yeah, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. Do check out the founding sponsors of the show, illustrationx.com, for all their global range of illustration and animation professionals. All those portfolios, they look fantastic. And do please consider supporting the Creative Condition book on the Kickstarter. You can do so now. Just follow the bio link on my Instagram, or head to my Twitter or my LinkedIn, or just drop me an email, hello@bentalon.com, for a chit chat, and I'll tell you all about it. Thank you to those who've pledged so far. It means the world. This is my life's cause. Cheers, guys. Have an awesome week. Stay creative.